Good afternoon to you. 406 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Emily Jashinsky will be with us. We'll take a look at that debate last night between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. Also, Donald Trump did a big old town hall on the Fox News channel. And then Congressman Andy Biggs is here at 5 o'clock. You can join us. 888-630-9625. 888-630-WMAL. Boy, the left is obsessed with race to the point that has really hurt the country in so many ways over time. And they say that, your race determines your destiny. And therefore, all of society should be structured around either advantaging you or holding you back on the basis of your skin color. It's absurd, but unfortunately, it's predominant. Here to discuss the latest manifestations of that is Joe Simonson, a senior investigative reporter for the Washington Free Beacon. He joins us on the phone. Joe, good to have you with us, sir. Thank you.
Vince, how are we?
Doing so well, Joe, and concerned, though, about your reporting this week. You have a headline, How the Biden Administration Put Race at the Center of Government Spending. How are they spending my money?
Yeah, no, it is disturbing. And Vince, every time I'm on your show, I feel like I just upset you with my news reporting. But this one, unfortunately, is not much better than other things I've come on to talk about. So to make a long story short, Biden, in his first month or two in office, signed this executive order, which established something called the Justice 40 Initiative. And what that does is it mandates that 40% or more of all climate spending going forward has to go to what the federal government defines as a disadvantaged community. Now, there are two things that are important to know about that. One is that everything, all the new spending that Biden has signed into law is climate spending. That includes the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. I bet a lot of Republicans didn't know that when they voted for it. And I bet a lot of people don't know that today. But bridges, all that kind of stuff, new roads, that is actually technically climate spending, according to the federal government now. So that means if you want a new bridge, or if there are grants grants available for money to build a new bridge, the political appointees at places such as the Department of Transportation are looking to give them to what they call disadvantaged communities. Now, what is a disadvantaged community? Well, a disadvantaged community does not just mean you're poor, right? So if you're a poor coal mining town or whatever, or you're just a lower working class area, you're not necessarily a disadvantaged community. You have to meet several criteria, one of which is low income, but you have to meet more than just being low income. And what the White House has done is say, well, we've created all these proxies for race. So things that they believe disproportionately impact minorities. And another way that they're basically just making sure this money, a lot of this money just goes to minority communities, is that they've given hundreds of millions of dollars in funding through the IRA to what they call community-based groups. And I think a lot of people know what community-based groups is code for. That is local activist groups in cities and towns across the country, obviously overwhelmingly left-wing, if not exclusively left-wing. And so those left-wing groups are there to provide technical assistance. And what technical assistance means is that they're helping people get the money. And a lot of these groups that are providing technical assistance, as I reported, on their websites openly say, if you're applying for a grant, make sure you're a person of color, make sure you're a black person, make sure you're a black woman, etc.
So the federal government is using racial prejudice as a means to disperse taxpayer funding?
Correct, yes. And it's funny, today, so one of the examples I cite in my piece was about, I talked to a career official at the Department of Transportation who's going through all these EV grants, and they, a place such as Alexandria, a lot of electric vehicles in Alexandria near me in D.C., they don't have a large enough disadvantaged community population, so they're not getting necessarily those EV grants. And today, the White House, or the Department of Transportation actually, just came out with the results of their first round of grant funding. And guess what? They're bragging that 70% of all the new EV charging grants went to disadvantaged communities. And I looked into, well, who got that money? Well, one of them, Vince, is a rural town in Alaska with a large native population that has 1,500 people in it. They got, I think, $3 million for an electric vehicle charging station in rural Alaska.
How effective, I mean, you may be getting to this point, but how effective is an electric vehicle in rural Alaska?
You know, I'm not going to say there are no electric vehicles up in this town. I've not been there.
Right.
But I can't imagine there are many.
I'm going to tell you right now. If I lived in Alaska, I would rely on an internal combustion engine. I would not be. I would not be playing around with an electric vehicle. Not exactly the climate for that.
No, exactly. And other they gave, I think, $10 million for Baltimore and HBCUs in the area. Now, I don't. Maybe I'm not saying that HBCUs shouldn't get that money, but it doesn't seem that there's any evidence that overwhelmingly black parts of Baltimore have a huge demand for electric vehicle chargers.
Well, it kind of also depends on whether or not you have space in your house to keep an electric vehicle, doesn't it? I mean, this is like I get charging stations outside of your home, but if you basically like the infrastructure required at home is another thing. You got to have probably garage space, a reliable access to a plug outlet that can sit next to your vehicle. I mean, there are some bare minimum requirements here.
Yeah, and sure, and that speaks to the point is that this isn't really based off demand, right? I mean, this place in Alaska that's getting this money, these areas of Baltimore. I mean, I'm happy to be proven wrong here, but when I think of who drives EVs, I think of like Blue Alexandria, right? And
right. Well, it's impractical in a city. I mean, if you live in a high rise, or if you live in like an apartment complex, it's much more impractical than it is if you are in a single family home or a townhome or somewhere where you have access to charging at home.
Exactly, and that's the point. It's not that the money. A lot of the money isn't necessarily going to what is most practical, what makes sense, what cities actually have a demand for this, what city says they can actually build these electric vehicle charging stations, right? That's part of it. Once the money is out the door, you can't get it back.
Now, you mentioned a moment ago this Justice 40 program, and so if I understand you correctly, what that means, like, so if the infrastructure bill, which you say is really a climate deal, it's what AOC wanted, it was a Green New Deal, and they're going to spend all this money. That means that 40% of the contracts can't be white people. Is that right? Like, you can hire companies, but they can't be led by white people.
That's not necessarily true. Obviously, they give large preferences to minorities. It's who supposedly benefits from these projects, and that, like I said, that includes bridges, right? So if I need a new bridge in my town, costs a lot of money, but where the bridge isn't in a quote unquote disadvantaged community, I'm going to have a really hard time getting that money for a new bridge or a new road or whatever. Got it.
All right. So so it's not about need. It's about skin color. I got that. I understand.
Exactly.
So does any of this, to your knowledge, run afoul of federal law? I mean, everywhere else in society, you're not allowed to do this. Actually, you're not allowed to prejudge people on the basis of their race in things like hiring. That's not allowed. In fact, you can get in massive trouble for that. But the federal government seems to be doing it without any consequence whatsoever.
Well, so they're trying to be clever about this, Vince. So there are documents that I received about this program from the White House, and the White House there's like a FAQ document. And one of the questions that the White House answers is like, well, is this just giving money based out on race? And they say, oh no, of course not. However, all these other criteria just happen to disproportionately impact people of color. And on that point that I mentioned earlier, they're making sure that these nonprofits get that money to minority communities, often at the expense of white people or whoever. So they're trying to be very clever, too clever by half, by saying, oh, no, it's not about race, but all these things seem to only hurt, minorities or disproportionately impact minorities. And also we'll make sure that these NGOs that are financed by Soros get money and make sure that it goes to the right place. Yeah, sure. But, we've had, this is sort of the history of the Democrat Party. But remember,
in the wake of slavery, in order to prevent black people from voting, they would use pretextual means to try and stop it. They would do things like literacy tests, and they'd devise some other metric besides race itself to conceal that this was a racially targeted effort. And we're seeing it play out again in the 2024 format.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think one important point that I think everyone should be aware of, that this Justice 40 initiative, this is a template that the Democrats, the Biden administration, want to use for all spending going forward. I bet you didn't know, Vince, that affordable housing is actually climate spending, right? But it is, according to the Biden administration. So that means all new affordable housing, for example, has to have this Justice 40 component. And again, it talks bridges, electric grids, EV chargers, all these things that the Biden administration has been touting that's going to be great is all under this umbrella of Justice 40.
If the point was to help poor communities, as you began the conversation talking about, Joe, if that was the point, then I think there are going to be people out there that would agree with it. You could disagree over federal spending. We all do. In fact, I want to see a lot less federal spending on all levels. But if you wanted to give out some money to poor communities, that'd be like a fairly easy formula, I think, to do. Do you believe the Biden administration fears that there may be white people among the poor beneficiaries?
I think I won't necessarily go that far, but I think so much of this is essentially giving money and benefits to parts of the Democratic coalition. Because remember, Vince, if we're building EV stations in like Baltimore, places that don't necessarily have a really huge demand, or like bad neighborhoods, or that place in Alaska, that's also really a jobs program for those people there. And it doesn't really matter if they get built or not. It doesn't really matter if anyone uses them. The Biden administration can come and be like, hey, like, you want a union job? We're going to like build like a solar plant in downtown Detroit. Like, you should join. Remember that in November.
Yes. Well, it also explains why when we look at the economic activity in the country, and the Biden administration keeps on claiming they're creating jobs, really the only sector that's actually growing is the government. That's a very dangerous and a precarious place to be as an economy when you're growing government jobs but not private sector ones. The whole thing will fall apart. Joe Simonson, thank you very much for digging into this and keeping them honest. I really appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, Vince.
Always good to talk to Joe and the people over at the Washington Free Beacon. Excellent reporting as usual. It's 4. All right, we've got some breaking news this hour on Hunter Biden. He is in California and he has pled not guilty to 9 different federal tax charges. It was his arraignment today. The first son, the Daily Caller's James Lynch reporting here, appeared in the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California for his arraignment after he was indicted by a federal grand jury in December on 9 tax-related charges, including 3 felonies. He pleaded not guilty to the charges after arriving early to the courtroom Thursday afternoon. He faces up to 17 years in prison for the tax charges. Here's the aside, which he'll never serve. That'll never happen. As Joe DeGenova was emphasizing earlier, a pardon is coming from Joe. One of Hunter Biden's attorneys and attorneys for special counsel David Weiss were also in the room. Weiss is leading the DOJ's ongoing criminal investigation into the president's son. I was reading the New York Times coverage of this arraignment today, and it's very, very ridiculous. In it, they say, let's see, there was an amazing moment. They were talking about how he was asked about his drug use by a reporter yesterday. It wasn't quite that, actually. They said they were talking about how Hunter Biden appeared before Congress yesterday. The move, intended to prove that Mr. Biden was willing to testify publicly, ended in chaos with Mr. Biden abruptly leaving as Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican of Georgia, began haranguing him. He was trailed by reporters, including one who asked about his drug use. Well, actually, it wasn't quite that. It wasn't quite that at all. In fact, the reporter asked if Hunter Biden, I guess he did ask about his drug use, but the reporter asked, what kind of crack do you normally smoke, Mr. Biden? Are you on crack right now? Was the question. And the New York Times is kind of underplaying the moment a little in typical fashion. But he is, there you go. He's pleading not guilty today to these tax charges. This would never have happened were it not for the IRS whistleblowers at all. The Delaware U.S. attorney was looking to keep this contained to Delaware and to give him a big old fat plea agreement that would immunize him from any meaningful charges whatsoever and any consequences whatsoever for any of the actions he's taken over the years. And that all fell apart because of the IRS whistleblowers, because they were courageous enough to step forward and to tell the truth. And you want further evidence that the IRS whistleblowers are telling the truth? The left has not been able to destroy their credibility. They haven't even been able to chip away at it. They haven't found a single part of their internet search history to be able to hurt these guys. They have sterling credibilities. They worked for decades investigating tax crime. And they reported that the federal government under Joe Biden was stopping them at every turn from digging into what was going on with the Bidens. In fact, some of that actually predates Biden. It was during the Trump administration. But the United States Department of Justice, out of control, blockading investigators from being able to look into the Biden family. And when all of that came to light, it served as as a predicate to say, wait a second, there's something very unusual going on here with this Hunter Biden character. That plea deal can't stand. A judge said that, and that's where we are now. Hunter Biden pleads guilty today to a range of tax charges. No consequences expected here on the Vince Coglianese Show. Coming up, Emily Jashinsky talks to us about the big Republican debate last night. Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley squaring off on a stage by themselves. The leader in the race was on a different stage entirely. We'll talk to Emily Jashinsky about all of it. Well, good afternoon to you. It is 4:35 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Congressman Andy Biggs is set to join us at 5 o'clock. He's a member of a bunch of important committees, Judiciary, Oversight. We'll talk Hunter Biden, Contempt of Congress, and also all of that apparent White House coordination with these Soros Democrat prosecutors across the country to meddle in our election by hurting Joe Biden's top political opponent. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. A pair of events last night in the 2024 GOP primary, as you had Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis square off on a debate stage with CNN moderating it, of all networks. And then meanwhile, Donald Trump was on stage with Fox News doing a town hall. It was fascinating to flip back and forth between the two channels. Here to discuss what took place last night, including the way the media reacted to it, Emily Jashinsky, culture editor over at the Federalist and the co-host of Counterpoints as well. Emily, good to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me, Vince.
I was watching this debate between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, and in a way, I kind of felt bad for them. The debate was very bitter. They do not like each other at this late stage in the race, and not a lot of conversation about Trump or Biden. A lot of barbs directed at each other, though.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And I actually was thinking as the night wore on that, for Nikki Haley, she has had to stake out positions essentially closer to the center of the sort of spectrum here than Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump for basically the last year as she's been running for president. And this is someone who during the Trump administration was generally popular with people on the right. But now she's spent months and months. I just don't know what her political future is after this, because she was constantly last night trying to explain herself on, for example, transgenderism. She was trying to explain herself on immigration. She was trying to explain herself on Ukraine, and they were going, at each other really, really hard. But I thought this was Ron DeSantis's best debate of any of them. Mm-hmm. He's gotten better every week, and that's not to say, they're all in a very, very, very distant second and third. At the end of the day, they're in a very distant second and third. But from Nikki Haley's perspective, she's she's losing credibility with voters on the right every single day because she has to stake out these positions to the left, essentially, of DeSantis and Trump.
And Ron DeSantis has been a great governor, so he's got a good story to tell. So that it stands to reason that he'd be able to project some of that on a debate stage. He certainly did last night. But with Nikki Haley, there was a desperation. She kept sharing a website URL throughout the debate last night to the point that the audience was turning on her. They were groaning as she kept sharing this. I think it was something about DeSantisLies.com or something like that. And but obviously that's a money-making exercise for her. She needs to drive people to a portal to give her campaign more money because she desperately needs it in order to succeed in New Hampshire.
I thought it was clever at first, and then after 2 hours, it was grating, and it started to feel like a crutch. And again, I always go back and forth as to whether Nikki Haley is a fantastic politician or a terrible one.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I can't tell if she's one or the other. But as this primary wears on, I'm just thinking to myself, she's had some great moments as a politician, just on the sort of strategic, tactical points. But it was a crutch she couldn't stop using yesterday. It felt like every time she got hit hard by DeSantis, she just went back to DeSantisLies.com.
Yeah. And also the truth is, like, during the debates, she also sets off alarm bells by appealing to identity politics as a rationale for why she should be president, which is like, whoa, wait a second. In 2024, you're really going to be wielding, I'm a woman, I wear high heels, I'm tough, I can get it done. But I think most of the Republican base, to the extent that they've ever been like convinced that that's a legitimate argument, that spell is broken. They're like, okay, wait, that's the dumbest thing I've heard. And it's the same, Nancy Mace earlier this week claiming that Hunter Biden had white privilege. That just sets off alarm bells. You're like, what are you doing?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And this is, again, it's like Nikki Haley, it's like she was picking up on the political wins, but years ago. She's doing like a really great job of running for president in 2012. But everything after, it's like she's missing all of the cues. And I think it speaks to the fact that she is running for a very narrow slice of the electorate, and it is a specific slice of the electorate, and it is a slice Republicans need. She is responding to what some, especially educated suburban women want to see from Republicans. They really don't like Trump. They never really have. And so they want to see a Republican Party that sort of rebounded from Trump from their perspective.
It's so crazy.
I don't think that's what Nikki Haley thinks she's running for. But even that, I don't think she's doing a good job. At one point, Ron DeSantis slammed her on transgenderism issues yesterday, and Haley responded, that was 10 years ago. I mean, just the worst possible response you can have if you're appealing to moms in middle America who want you to be a leader. That's forward thinking on these issues that have taken the country by surprise.
Well, on the identity politics front, there was an interesting reaction by the media last night, something actually kind of predictable, to be honest with you. DeSantis kept on using a phrase that he's used on the campaign trail. I'm going to play this. This is from the debate last night, and the phrase "pale pastels" comes up here to kind of tell people in advance. This is also a phrase that Ronald Reagan used back in the 80s. Here's Ron DeSantis last night.
Here's the thing. We need to fly a flag of bold colors, carrying the banner of putting the American people first, not the pale pastels of the warmed-over corporatism of people like Nikki Haley.
Okay, so that phrase, pale pastels, somehow an NBC reporter got a hold of that last night and thought that was a sexist attack on Nikki Haley's clothing choice. Can you explain what's going on here?
It gets even better than that, Vince. 3 NBC reporters by the end of the night had made the strong suggestion that Ron DeSantis was being sexist when he used that. Nikki Haley was wearing a light pink dress yesterday, but because these NBC News political reporters, it started with Ali Vitale, who was one of their absolute stars. She tweeted that she tweeted heavily suggesting that when Ron DeSantis is using the pale pastels line, it's an attack on Nikki Haley's clothes, because clearly Ali Vitale didn't know that this was an allusion to Ronald Reagan. Allie Vitale thought this was so clever that she put it on NBC News' live blog. So not just a tweet, she posted it on NBC News' live blog. One of her colleagues chimed in to say, oh, well, this is part of Ron DeSantis' stump speech. He uses it all the time in Iowa. That said, it does come across differently when he's talking about Nikki Haley.
Okay.
So if you're keeping track at home, that's 2 NBC News reporters. Then Alex Seitz-Wald, another one of their stars, put it in his story that was the definitive kind of take on what had happened at the Iowa debate, and said basically outright that all kinds of people were wondering, why Ron DeSantis was being so sexist against Nikki Haley. So all 3 of them demonstrated that they had no idea, which, Vince, if you go to Republican events, conservative events, because you're a political reporter whose job is to cover the Republican Party and conservative voters, you have heard that phrase before. It is one of the most popular Reagan lines that you hear at these types of events. So it was just a remarkable display of ignorance.
But let me understand the chain of custody here. The female reporter at MSNBC, young woman, didn't realize that this was from Reagan. So rather than say, oh, my bad, I should have known that, instead, the justifications got dumber and dumber, and 2 male reporters came in and they simped for her, and they pretended like there was some justification for why her dumb position was worth defending in the first place.
And it's funny because they didn't seem to even realize that there was that people were laughing at them. I think they probably tune a lot of that out. They think like these dumb conservatives, I'm not going to listen to them. But they really leaned in. That I think is the important thing to remember about all of this. It's not just that they're ignorant; it's that they're accusing Ron DeSantis of sexism. And these are the people that think you need to be protected from disinformation by them. They should be the guardians of information because you're too dumb to understand information yourself. Meantime,
I'm telling you, though. I'm telling you, though, that first response from that other NBC reporter, Alex Hernandez, it says that line, I'm going to re-quote what you said. DeSantis' pale pastels reference is a line pulled from his stump speech. He often says that Republicans need to lead with core convictions and govern with bold colors, not pale pastels. That said, saying it out of context here, standing next to Haley, does come off differently. Everything after the words "that said" is literally just an excuse for why his colleague got it wrong. It's not, he's only offering her a concession. That's all. It's like trying to figure out a way to spin her out of this.
I know, it was so funny. It was so funny. Even when somebody, presumably he's been on the ground in Iowa all of this time, and so he thinks he's coming in with a new piece of knowledge, but he's still missing the bigger piece of knowledge. It's just amazing.
It really is amazing. Meanwhile, Donald Trump was on a town hall stage last night with the Fox News channel. And, talking to friends and colleagues, I agree. He seemed as natural and as ready to go as he has this entire campaign. He was very much at ease last night and seemed to be handling the interaction with the crowd there well.
Just a really stark contrast from 2 people who are battling it out so bitterly, fighting for their careers for a very, very distant second, right? It's not like one of them is within reaching distance of Trump. They're down double digits basically everywhere. And so when you have, it's not like they're down 5%. Like they're struggling to be in second place in most of these states and nationally. And they're fighting bitterly for their careers. And Trump is just swatting down questions left and right from, tough moderators who are pushing him on tough things. To your point, Vince, similar reaction. He did seem like he was in, politically good form.
Yeah, well, I'll play some audio from Trump last night because I do think some of his answers were super interesting. One of them is that the left is saying he's going to hurt everybody. He's going to be a dictator. And they point to his prior pursuit of retribution. That's a phrase that he's used. And to normal people among us, it does make sense that people who have violated the law should be held accountable, including while Trump was president, the ones who were trying to stagger his presidency. But Trump is backing away from this term retribution. In fact, he says he's not even going to really need it because success is the best retribution. Listen to this.
You're in your rallies. You spend a lot of time talking about retribution. And so there are questions about how much a second term of a Donald Trump presidency, second term, would be about retribution and looking backwards and grievances, and how much would be looking forward.
Well, first of all, a lot of people would say that that's not so bad. Look what they did. Russia hoax, the FBI Twitter hoax, the 51 intelligence agents hoax, all of these different hoaxes that they did. I mean, a lot of people would say That's probably quite normal. I'm not going to have time for retribution. We're going to make this country so successful again. I'm not going to have time for retribution. And remember this. Our ultimate retribution is success.
Now, I will say, having heard that answer, I'll admit to a little bit of disappointment in it, because I was like, I do think that people should be held accountable for their tyrannical behavior. But what did you read into that answer?
Yeah, no, I actually saw some interesting responses to that from people in the conservative space saying, retribution, at least like politically and substantively, as good of a line as that is, and like Trump is in his sort of usual form there, he rattled it off very naturally as though it had never been scripted, and it probably never had been scripted. But the substance of retribution in this case is reforming, and it's creating and enforcing consequences, and disincentivizing corrupt behavior. And so to some extent, there's a very substantive argument for retribution, at least legally, in so many of these cases. And that, I think, actually sparked a really interesting discussion. But as folks just heard there, it was like classic Trump, really. And it opens up the question of, when he's in those debates with other candidates, I think there's a pretty good argument that he's at his best. And so, I heard, I think, Anderson Cooper talking yesterday about what a shrewd decision Donald Trump had made with David Axelrod and Abby Phillips over on CNN not to do the debates. Well, to some extent, yeah, I mean, it shows that he's really above the pack. On the other hand, we don't know how much more he would have been up if he was
Sure. Yeah, it's sort of unfalsifiable.
Because when you listen to him with Brett Baer, he's able to handle all of that.
Yeah, it is sort of unfalsifiable. But the reality is, of course, he skipped the debates and he's doing better than ever. So so we don't actually know what it would have looked like before, but for now it's working. Whatever he's doing is working right now. Emily Jashinsky, thank you. I really appreciate your time as always. Great to talk to you today. A couple other moments of note from Donald Trump's town hall on the Fox News channel last night. Let's see. This is one that a lot of debate on the right last night between DeSantis supporters and Trump supporters. All the DeSantis supporters are really upset about this moment. Take a listen. Here's Trump talking about Ron DeSantis and Anthony Fauci.
If you go back and look at the records, you will see that the biggest fan of Dr. Fauci was Ron DeSanctimonious. He was a big fan. He said, I go by, exactly, quote, I go by what Dr. Fauci said. He said that 2 months in, all the way through, and then eventually changed when it wasn't, that wasn't the dessert of the day. But Ron DeSantis was a big Dr. Fauci fan, and nobody wants to cover that. I say it every time.
Yeah, I'm going to go with that's a bit of a pretty dramatic revisionist history. In terms of the people who came out very early among Republican governors, Ron DeSantis definitely did against the federal mandates and requirements. And DeSantis, I think, deserves a lot of credit. Now, in the early days, there was the issue of beaches closing in Florida and some of the same stupidity we saw all across the country. But once, in terms of just breaking out of the spell, Florida was among the earliest states in the country to do it. And so Ron DeSantis deserves credit for it, and he spent a lot of time fighting back against Fauci. He's appointed all sorts of people who have given much better medical advice than Anthony Fauci ever did. Anthony Fauci, I don't blame Trump. I understand why he's trying to run away from this guy. But there is no question that he stayed around too long. And we've talked about this before. There's all sorts of people like, well, you can't fire him because it's so hard to fire people. That's fine. Just don't put him on television. Don't make him the voice box of the administration on everything you're doing with COVID. It's a bad idea. Also, he keeps sucking up to the World Health Organization in China. That's stupid. There are a lot of red flags with that Anthony Fauci. But I can see, again, nobody really wants to take ownership of him. Also, Trump was asked about who he might pick for Veep. Interesting answer.
Let me just ask you a follow-up on that about who would be in your cabinet, in your administration. If you are the nominee, which I know you expect to be, who would be in the running for vice president?
Well, I can't tell you that, really. I mean, I know who it's going to be.
Give us a hint.
We'll do another show sometime.
Well, what about any of the people who you've run against? Would you be open to mending fences with any of them?
I will. I've already started to like Christie better.
It's funny. No, he wouldn't say. He claims he's already got the pick. I don't know. I've been thinking Ben Carson. Corey and I were just talking about this. I think Ben Carson might fit the bill. He would never outshine Trump. He's brilliant. People love him. He'd be a big hit with the evangelicals. Why not? But who knows? Only Trump And that could change day by day. We'll bring you updates as we have them. It's 4:58.